welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Christopher Owens, Dianetics Counselor, has 30 years of experience as a professional Dianetics Counselor and is the owner of Happy Warrior Counseling, where he helps people to rapidly and permanently recover from traumatic experiences. Welcome to the show, Christopher.
Thank you very much for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form, Christopher. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about Dianetics. We'll talk about its role, how one can get help in healing trauma. We'll all understand that. But first, let's understand a bit about you, about your background, so that people know a little bit more from you about who they are listening to.
Okay, well, I've been a Dianetics counselor for over 30 years. I actually, my background's, I guess, a little bit unique in that I was professionally trained in this at the age of 17. So I've been doing it quite a while. It's, I guess, unusual for, a teenager to have that level of interest in something like this, to really want to, help people in that way. But it's kind of who I was. But yeah, so, I mean, that's basically it. I have Happy Warrior Counseling now. I also have a charity that I started that's called the Restored Valor Project. And that is focused specifically on helping military veterans that are struggling with PTSD. Again, using Dianetics therapy.
Right. So for a common person who has not heard this word called Dianetics, but does know about what it can do, about trauma, about mental health and all this, how would you like to help them understand what Dianetics is all about? Even I didn't know exactly what it meant. Only, while doing a bit of research, then I could know, okay, this is it and this is connected. So I learned something new about it. But for a lot of people who would also be in the same way, not knowing about this part, help them understand this word Dianetics.
Sure. So first, let's take the word itself. So if you break the word down and you look at its etymology, dia means through, and nous means mind, or you could say mind or soul, but let's say mind. So Dianetics literally means through the mind. Now, what it is and where it comes from. So L. Ron Hubbard is the man who developed Dianetics. Many people may know the name L. Ron Hubbard because he was later the founder of Scientology, the Scientology religion.
Yeah, Tom Cruise.
Yep, Tom Cruise is a prominent member. I am a Scientologist, just so you know. But Dianetics itself as a therapy is not particularly spiritual or religious. Like if you were to read the book, originally it was a book in 1950, May 9th, 1950 it was published. It's called Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. And if you were to read that book cover to cover, it reads like, something that belongs in psychology. Okay. Except the difference is he was providing a therapy which is not available and is not available in the main mental health system. It is not, psychologists are not trained in it. Psychiatrists are not trained in it. Right now you exclusively get it either at a Scientology organization or through a Dianetics counselor, an independent Dianetics counselor, that kind of a thing. And that's an important thing to note, because what he was doing very much when he wrote the book was he was trying to correct the mental health system. He was seeing that there was something very wrong with it in terms of the results. Like even today, I mean, that was 1950. Even look at today, one example I like to use is, and it kind of demonstrates how messed up the mental health system is, but we don't even realize it. We're so used to it. Like think about this. Okay, let's say you want to get your car fixed, and you bring it to your mechanic. The mechanic spends 15 minutes on the car, and he says, "Oh yes, your car has sputter disorder. Okay, here's what I'm going to need you to do. I need you to bring the car back to me once a week for about an hour. There's no guarantee how many weeks or months or years it's going to take for you to, me to fix this car. And I don't know if I'll ever fix it, but that's what's going to be needed to resolve this. And in the meantime, take these. And so what's that? Oh, those are earplugs. If you wear those, in the meantime, you won't hear the noise quite as much that your car has been making. And now, of course, if you went to a mechanic today and that happened, you would, of course, think this guy's a quack. He doesn't know how to do his job. And you would find another mechanic. But what if all mechanics were like that? What if that was the standard? Then the opposite would be true. A mechanic would come by and he would say, well, you know what? I can fix your car this afternoon. Just come back later and pick it up. And you'd think he was the quack, because you've already been educated the fact that cars are hard to fix and they're hard to understand and nobody can really do anything about cars. That's the mental health system. And so, and that's the reason why, not only, there are therapies that have no clear end. Occasionally you get dramatic results, but they're very sporadic. A lot of times the gains that are gotten are really based on the fact that one particular counselor happens to be a good communicator, and others don't, but that the therapies itself often don't have any predictable, consistent results. And then because the therapies don't work, people have to do what they really would rather not do, but they don't know what else to do, which is take these dangerous psychiatric drugs to somehow, medicate away the problem, even though, it's based on some idea of chemical imbalance, even though there's no medical test for chemical imbalance that's ever existed. It's really a marketing story that was made up for the drugs. So anyway, that's the system. And the system was a little worse even back in 1950, because back then they were also doing like transorbital leucotomies and, which are like a type of lobotomy where they kind of take an ice pick into the eye. It's pretty barbaric stuff. Anyway, in that setting, he did his own research and developed a therapy that actually works. And when I say works, I mean, and like I said, a lot of people think this is crazy even to say, but you give me an individual with any, like let's say they have a particular traumatic incident. It doesn't matter what kind of incident it is. It doesn't matter how severe it is. In almost all cases, I could sit the person down in one session and completely resolve that incident. Like, in other words, they would never need to address that incident ever again. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to give you the idea that you can solve an entire person's, all their problems in one session. Like, let's say someone's been beaten for 10 years. Well, there's many incidents there, and you're not going to address all of them in one session. You don't have enough time, right? But the thing is, real help, like the ability to really remove pain out of a memory, much like, if you think of a painful experience, much like a battery that it's fully charged, and you go and you touch it and you get zapped. You touch it and you get zapped, and this happens over and over. Whenever you get reminded of the experience, it's like touching that battery and getting zapped. Well, if you had a way where you could just take a piece of metal, throw it across both of the poles in that battery, and just all the energy exhausts out of it, and it's just empty after that, we're at the end now, it's just a regular memory, no more painful than remembering what you had for dinner last night. That's what you can do with Dianetics.
Right, Christopher. So for Dianetics, one needs to be a doctor. They have to have that qualification, just like
No.
a psychologist does.
No, not at all. In fact, like I said, you can't even go to a college and get trained in this. You would have to get trained at a Scientology organization. That's where they offer the courses. And the course doesn't take super long to get trained. It would be a matter of months of training, really. And it doesn't require any other, there's some other training you might do in the organization, like that teaches you, there's tools for how to study effectively. So maybe someone does that. But basically the Dianetics training, it's so wild. It doesn't have to take long to get trained. It's not hard to do it. Obviously, the more experience you get as a Dianetics counselor, the better. I've been doing it for a long time, but no, it's actually, Dianetics is one of the things that's also really unique about it is, although a professional like myself, someone who's done like the pro training, has a lot of tools in his arsenal when you go to address an incident. Even if you, though, just took the basic structure of a Dianetic session, which is very simple, okay? The basic structure, you can actually, and this is done where we do like a Dianetics seminar. I could take a group of people, let's say take 30 people, and there's a video, how to use Dianetics video, and explains like all the basics of how Dianetics works, and shows the basic structure of a session, basic steps. And anybody can actually watch that, by the way. They go to happymind.watch. They'll go right to the page on my site that has this video. It's about an hour and a half long. But I could do a seminar over a weekend, go through this video chapter by chapter, explain, answer questions, then pair everyone up, give them a booklet that has the basic steps of the procedure. And you can literally take people who have never done it before and supervised, with people like myself supervising there, you can have them just do the basic structure of a session and get much better results than most therapies that are out there, just doing the basic procedure. And that's one of the really interesting things about Dianetics, is you can actually set people up where they can do this peer-to-peer type stuff, and get some pretty amazing results. It's also very rewarding for them because they're helping someone else.
Right, Christopher. So, some people will say trauma and mental health is a serious thing, and for that, a certain degree of qualification is required. That may be their perception. Is that the reason that people are not able to understand Dianetics with that seriousness, like that of a psychologist? Secondly, as they say, the taste of the pudding lies in its eating. So, if Dianetics is so successful and it works, people who are getting well or in better, nicely and positively impacted by it, why is that story not spreading as much as it should be? Is it about a system which is putting it down? But how long can a system put something good down? It's been many years that it's been existing. I want to understand this.
Yeah, sure.
Clear that fog around this Dianetics thing.
Okay, so to your first question, you were asking about people, considering trauma and that type of stuff very serious. Well, I mean, serious, fine. We can. There's no sense in arguing whether it's serious or not. It's as serious as it is affecting the person, right? Some people experience a trauma and they move on from that very quickly, and other people, the trauma is affecting them on a day-to-day basis and rising to the level of what would be categorized typically as PTSD, where they're literally their day-to-day life is affected by it. I mean, so that happens. I mean, that's not really a point of debate. The point of debate really is how, like, the concept that people have of how hard it is to solve. That's the part that's not true. And that's a concept that people have only because they have a system telling them all the time, this is so hard. And why do they tell them it's so hard? Well, I'm sure some people in the system believe that, but it also is a convenient statement when they can't do anything about it, right? I mean, if you, like I said, in that world where the car mechanics operate that way, it behooves them for everyone to believe that cars are hard to fix, right? Now, part of it is they don't know how to fix the cars. That's part of the problem. So they do believe that. So, I mean, I don't blame people for thinking that it's that hard and that serious. They're just dealing within the context of what they've been exposed to. But once you see how easily something can be resolved, it's a complete paradigm shift. And it's so easy to demonstrate this. And so to your second question, which gets into that, which is a common question to say, well, if it works so great, then why isn't everyone using it, right? Well, I would point back to, I don't know if much about things like, what doctors used to believe about how blood operated in the body. For a long time, doctors operated off of this basis of tides of the blood. The blood moved in tides throughout the body. And there were individuals who were saying, no, well, look, we've done vivisection. We can see there's a circulatory system here. right? The heart's pumping it through these veins and arteries, and that's how blood moves through the body. And for a while, there was a situation where like the people who said that were quacks by the medical community. They treated them like they were quacks. You're crazy. That's not. Everyone knows this expert over here. Everyone knows he's the expert, and he says it operates this way. But ironically, if you went hundreds of years earlier, you could have found that Leonardo da Vinci had already figured out the circulatory system. And he was just a crazy artist, right? What could he know? And to the same degree, L. Ron Hubbard, because he was a writer and he wrote fiction and, science fiction and stuff like that, they'll easily try to dismiss him and say, oh, he's a science fiction writer. He just made all this stuff up. Look, knowledge is available to anyone who's willing to look for it. It doesn't matter what their background is. I mean, if you want to get technical, it's kind of like saying, well, it's kind of like criticizing the Christian religion by saying, well, he was a carpenter. He couldn't possibly have, it doesn't, it's a silly argument, right? So anyway, but yes, there's a deeply entrenched system that benefits from people's ignorance of the mind. It's especially bad with psychiatry, because okay, you could say maybe if it was just psychology, they might have caught on by now. But psychiatry is a little different. They're far worse, because these are medical doctors that often, interestingly enough, a psychiatrist does not have to even be trained in therapy. I don't know if you realize that. They could actually be not trained in therapy at all, but still be supposedly this expert on the mind. But it behooves them. They want there to be a physical reason for mental illness, because that justifies their existence. If mental illness is not caused by physical things like a chemical imbalance or a genetic problem or a brain problem, if it isn't, then there is no reason for psychiatrists to be involved in mental health at all. So they've always had to have a reason for that. And for some reason, psychiatry has become the dominant factor, like the kind of the authority of authorities, even over psychologists, even in the mental health field. And these are the guys pushing psychiatric drugs, pushing electroconvulsive therapy, lobotomies, things along these lines. But there's never been any evidence for this. I mean, if you go back earlier, we think of this chemical imbalance theory they have today. Back in the 1800s and 1700s, they had a different chemical imbalance theory. They believed that it was all blood flow. And so they used to do bloodletting as a method of treating insanity and all kinds of weird barbaric things. Anyway, so this system, psychiatry and the pharmaceutical company has spent a lot of dollars over many years trying to discredit L. Ron Hubbard, Dianetics, Scientology, doing these things to try to make it look crazy, because they do not want people to step into their territory.
What is the method of Dianetics? There are also people listen like one therapy is, or because does it also talk about medicines? In Dianetics, also it's just like listening to people's problem, just like a psychologist does. And then,
it's talk, obviously. Yeah, there's no physical action you do to the person or medicine. So it's talk, yes. But the Dianetics is focused on, it's focused on repetitively confronting specific painful experiences. And it categorizes those painful experiences into either emotional pain or physical pain. Okay. Obviously, you can have an incident that has both, but so, for example, whereas in some, it obviously, because different therapies, other psychological therapies vary in various ways, right? But if you think of regular like cognitive behavioral therapy and compare it to that, well, they might do more general discussion. They might do strategies about how to tackle something, whatever. It's one thing to do cognitive behavioral therapy if you're trying to deal with a present time circumstance. Like, let's say someone is currently in a relationship with someone who's abusive, and they need someone just to talk to and figure out strategies of how to get out of that relationship. That's a different matter. That's a present time circumstance. What I'm talking about with Dianetics is addressing past painful experiences. So let's say you've been feeling depressed. Okay, well, that's going to go back to a Dianetics counselor is going to find specific painful incidents that happened in your past and go over them as individual incidents. So we will say, like I said, let's say they say, I've been depressed for 10 years. Okay. When did it start? All right. Well, ever since my mom died, my mom died and my uncle died, and I've been kind of recovering from that. Okay. Well, whereas let's say a regular counselor might have them talk generally about their feelings and stuff like that, or how they maybe talk about strategies and stuff. What I would do is say, okay, good. Let's take one of those incidents and address it. Okay. Let's take the first one, when your mother died. Okay, good. And I would bring them back to the day when they found out. Okay. Believe it or not, if you think about a painful experience, let's say, okay, so you're in your kitchen, you're doing dishes, your brother calls you and he says, mom's dead, right? And you go through the sudden drop of emotion and you suffer through all that, and then you talk to him, you call someone else, there's a variety of things you do. There's a funeral a couple days later. Then you have to clean up their house. There's all these painful experiences connected with it. And so a person can generally tend to think, well, the pain is kind of everywhere. It's over all of this time. The interesting thing is most of the pain is stored in the memory when you were told. When you were sitting there doing dishes, and they called and they told you. That immediate period of time contains the vast majority of the pain. And a lot of all the things afterwards that you associate with being upsetting as well are just things that re-stimulated that moment, that triggered that moment. So if you can go back to that period, and if you know how to go over it repetitively, and you know what to get the person to focus on in the experience, you can exhaust that pain out really fast and very efficiently and save yourself a whole lot of other trouble. Let me give you a different example. So that's more like with emotional pain. Here's another thing that's very unique in terms of the Dianetic approach. Let's say, this is the example I often give. It's just a useful one. So let's say you're claustrophobic, okay? And so whenever you get in an elevator, you feel like you can't breathe and you feel like you got to get out. And you say, okay, well, how long have you had this? I say, well, ever since when I was 10 years old, and my brother locked me in the closet for 15 minutes. And ever since then, I've been claustrophobic. Okay, now if you examine that experience, nothing really bad happened to you there. Like you were in the closet, it was dark, but you could breathe fine in the closet. You weren't hurt, right? There wasn't anything really bad that happened, but it was more a reaction you had to it. What a Dianetics counselor would recognize in that is that experience is not actually what caused the claustrophobia. It's just what triggered it. Okay. But that there must be a painful experience a real painful experience that's prior to it, that must have been dormant until this incident turned it on. And one of the clues is, when they get in the elevator, they can't breathe. Well, they could breathe fine in the closet. The real incident has to be one where there was an issue with breathing. Either the person's air was really restricted in the original incident, or here's another interesting thing with Dianetics is that when a person's in a lot of pain, the words and phrases that are said around them go into their mind like hypnotic commands. So it could have been that someone let's say they got hurt bad, and then around them someone was talking about they can't breathe. That could also cause the breathing thing. Okay, so we don't know which one. Let's say is the counselor. We just know we have this thing when they were 10 years old. But by using the incident at 10 years old, we can trigger or re-stimulate the earlier incident, and then we find when they were 2 years old and they totally forgot about this experience, some kids locked him in an abandoned refrigerator and he almost suffocated to death. That incident happened, it sat dormant, then the other incident happened, turns it on, and now they're claustrophobic. So, number one, we can find these incidents. We understand the logic of how they work, and that's another thing that's often missing in traditional therapy. We can find them, and when we find the incident, we can exhaust the pain out of them. Another really interesting facet of Dianetics therapy is that, okay, I gave you an example right there where it was, okay, the original incident was here, and then you had a trigger. But let's say another one. Let's say let's say somebody's having bad headaches, Okay. And so you try to address an incident. Let's say they had a car accident, they hit their head in the car accident. And that was a legitimate incident that is part of the headache thing. But when you try to address the pain in that incident, as a Dianetics counselor, I might notice that it's not exhausting its pain the way it should. Like it, and because I know what to expect and I know how the pain should exhaust after a certain period of time, after a certain number of times over the incident and such. If it doesn't, I know something. I know that there's an earlier similar incident to this one. And so I can ask for it and we can look there and we might find that there's a chain of incidents. We might find that, okay, so that was when they were 21, they got the car accident. When they were 15, they were riding their bike and went over the handlebars and hit their head. When they were 8, they were in a tree and they fell out of the tree and hit their head, right? When I get to the root incident on that chain, that one will exhaust its pain. And when it does, it not only will release the pain out of that one, but it will to some degree depower those later painful incidents and make them either much easier to address or maybe unnecessary to address. And that's another element in Dianetics that is a key factor that is not really considered or understood well in other types of therapy.
Right, Christopher. Let's look at the Restored Valor project. You are the founder and executive director of the Restored Valor project. The mental health issue is very much, it's a big issue in terms of the veterans, and
Yep.
there is so much talk around it, and it's alarming. The rate of suicides and all, that's very much alarming. How much has been Dianetics successful there? Tell us a bit about that. How is this working?
Well, to be fair, Dianetics, I'm sorry, that charity is relatively new. So it doesn't have a lot of history. It's something I'm working on kind of getting out there and getting exposed. So I don't know a lot of, I can, while there are some experiences of people on there that you can see, some videos, I don't have a long track record relative to that. But addressing trauma in general, I certainly do. I mean, like I said, like 30 years of doing it. Just to be totally clear on that. The one thing that I would like to make clear about the veteran stuff is, yes, the most alarming figure that people talk about is like the 22 suicides a day relative to veterans. But what I would like to point out is that people often assume that is from trauma. And that's not necessarily true. In fact, just the fact that you experience a traumatic incident, it doesn't necessarily tend to make a person suicidal. It does a lot of things to a person, making them miserable in various ways. But the real source of the suicide problem is the treatment that they've been getting, because they're being given psychiatric drugs, and the drugs, all psychiatric drugs, have in their side effects listed suicidal ideation. That is, the drug can make someone suicidal even if they are not suicidal beforehand. That is the real threat relative to the suicide element, right? So like I said, like I said, trauma itself is, like the 22 suicides a day is not explained by trauma alone. If you remove the drugs out of the equation, if people weren't taking psychiatric drugs, then we would have the real number of whatever that is. But I guarantee it wouldn't be 22 a day. It would be far less. We would still have people with trauma, but we wouldn't have that problem. And that's the thing that a lot of people, they don't realize. It's a really bad issue. These drugs cause so much difficulty for people.
Right, but the problem is that you cannot remove all of it when it's been a part of this whole system and it's being prescribed by psychologists, psychiatrists, and physicians. It's a very tricky situation to understand.
Well, I mean, honestly, frankly, those drugs should be banned. They don't. There's no good. They don't do any good. If you look at all the studies related to psychiatric drugs, the success rate of the actual drug compared to placebo is negligible, which means that the majority of people who are claiming they get better on psychiatric drugs is because they believe the drug is helping them, not because the drug has inherent value. whereas there are real liabilities that come with all of those drugs. However, if someone's on them now, they have to, if they wanted to get off, they really should have a doctor tell them how to do it safely and, wean off, because they can be just as dangerous to weaning off them, and not just because of whatever original condition they have, but because the drugs can cause a variety of weird effects on a person, even trying to come off them.
Right, Christopher. So, how do you see this whole Dianetics thing? Do you think its time has come finally, with so much, not so great success about the existing system, and that Dianetics must be looked at much more closely? How do you see
Yeah.
it going forward, especially now that you are associated with the Restored Valor project?
Yeah, well, that's part of the reason why I'm getting out and doing the doing podcasts and things like that, because I want to get out there and start having this conversation more and more. I've noticed that on social media platforms, particularly Twitter, there are, or X now, right? I've noticed that there seems to be a growing community of people who are criticizing the psychiatric industry and who are speaking out against the psychiatric drugs. It used to be, since the 1950s, it was really just us for a long time. And then others started to catch on. One book that is really amazing, that really exposes this stuff really bad, is called Mad in America. It was written by a medical journalist named Robert Whitaker, and it gives you the last 200 plus years of psychiatry, just one bad idea after another, and how that worked out. It's actually wild. Even if you take because people might assume, they say, well, don't you need the drugs for people who are schizophrenic and stuff like that? No, you don't. The drugs are not helping them either. I've spoken with people who are on these drugs, and even people who are we're hearing voices and they've taken the drugs for it. If you ask them, they'll tell you it doesn't get rid of the voices, it just makes them a little quieter. And the thing is, if you read that book, Mad in America, one of the things it points out is, who do you think were the most successful people in history resolving schizophrenia? Any idea?
No, Christopher.
The York Quakers. So the York Quakers used to have their own institutions back in the 1800s, and they were separate from psychiatry and psychiatric institutions. So, and all they did, they kept their populations minimum to a maximum of 250. They gave them real living quarters, had them dressed like normal human beings, not in robe, gowns and stuff. They treated them. They gave them no psychiatric treatments. They gave them activities. They gave them space. Get them outside. Extrovert them, that type of thing. They treated them like they were just brothers and sisters that needed a chance to get back to themselves. And they had almost 80% success rate, people recovering from schizophrenia. What happened was psychiatry, they didn't like their territory being imposed upon. They started to create more and more diagnoses, up the population of people being labeled into institutions. They got the commitment laws changed, so you had to have psychiatrists on the board of the organization, and eventually they just forced them out. Now all those old institutions are psychiatric run now, the originally Quaker ones. But there was even a thing in the 1970s where the head of the National Institute of Mental Health of Schizophrenic Studies was keen to this whole concept, and he wanted to run an experiment with an organization, with a facility that was like this, and he did it. They didn't want him to do it, but he was in charge of schizophrenic studies. What could they do? So he did this, and it was wildly successful. It got the same kinds of results. People got better. There were no psychiatrists who worked in the place. It was just they hired people who were just compassionate and empathetic, right? And it worked. And you know what they did? Mothballed it afterwards. Didn't do anything with it, even though it worked way better than anything else out there. Why? Pharmaceutical companies can't make money off that model. And it used to be, back in the 1950s, if a pharmaceutical company wanted to get a drug approved, they used to have to bend over backwards and like beg a doctor to do the study to validate their drug. That's how it used to be, right? The doctors were in the superior position relative to the drug companies. Now it's the complete opposite. The pharmaceutical companies have tons of money, and the doctors are like, "Can I please do a study for you?" And of course they're going to give them the results they want to hear, right? And so and then they get paid for doing speaking gigs for the pharmaceutical company, and all this. It's the paradigm is so messed up. And in the U.S., it's a little worse because they can actually advertise, prescription drugs directly on television. So that's why I think, that's why you find 80% of the pharmaceutical companies in the world are within like 2 hours of Washington. They're
Right. That was something new when I learned, not just a few months back, that yes, in the US you can actually advertise prescription drugs, all those. But in India you can't. You have the OTC medicine, maybe the rules are different, a few here and there, but we don't see too many of them. And
yeah.
uh, for the rest, obviously, you have the prescription here. So there is so much to learn about these things, Christopher. And all I can wish is that more and more options should be available to people who are having these issues, and nothing should stop them. Nothing is, unless you are not taking something, inhaling something, eating something, or even till that time, everything seems to be safe. And Dianetics, in that sense, I guess, can be another option for a lot of people, except that they should have a bit of more understanding and learning about these things, which you are doing through whatever you are doing, and also with the Restored Valor project. So for those
Yeah, and
people
that's why.
who want to learn more from you, about you, all these things, what's the best way for them to connect with you, Christopher?
Well, like I mentioned before, I think if they go to happymind.watch, it goes right to a page on my site, the Happy Warrior Counseling site, but it goes right to the page that has the Dianetics video. They can just watch it on there. It's set up like a YouTube playlist, so it's like 15 short videos, it's one long video like that. So that video is really well done. It's very engaging as well, but it explains the whole theory of Dianetics, explains the basic structure of how a session works. That's a great place to start. Then if a person wanted to look for, let's say, a Dianetics counselor, I'm in New Jersey, and in America, I'm guessing most of the people on your podcast are probably in India or that type of thing. But there are
In the US, many of them, more than 50-60%.
Oh, are there? Okay, great.
Right.
Well, just so you know, though, there are actual organizations in India as well. And not only that, but Dianetics is actually translated into over 50 languages, including Hindi and Urdu, just so you know. But what they can do is they can go to Dianetics.org, and there is a locator on there. There's both a locator where you can kind of put your zip code in and find like what organization or someone's closest to you. There's also a hotline where you can call, and they can maybe help you to connect with someone, right? Obviously, if someone's in my area, have them go to happywarriorcounseling.com and connect with me. If they are a veteran, they're looking to help on this, then they should go to restoredvalor.org, and we would help them that way. And just so you know, relative to having its time come relative to Dianetics, I'm right now in the process of doing the first formal. Although L. Ron Hubbard used the scientific method and did lots of scientific experiments when he developed Dianetics, I'm doing the first modern formal scientific study right now using Dianetics and PTSD. And so hopefully, I would imagine next year I'll have a paper published on that.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.